Arrogance mistakes silence for surrender. At 9:12 a.m., Theodore Halberd sat beneath the faded blue ribbons of the Dry Creek County Fairgrounds, waiting for a 10-minute board vote on a $186 million land sale. 5 days had passed since the Wildfire evacuation, yet the old 4-H judging room still smelled of hay, paper coffee cups, and smoke carried in on people's coats. Outside, county trucks moved between livestock barns that had sheltered more than 600 residents. Theodore believed the emergency was already behind him. His laptop displayed the Hawthorne Ridge closing documents, covering 1,400 acres located 14.3 miles from the nearest active fire line. The buyer's lawyers had approved the price. The bank had prepared the wire instructions, and his assistant had placed a silver folder beside his hand. The red notice had remained on the portal for 4 days. 28.7% of Halberd residential communities was still classified as disputed beneficial ownership, preventing the vote from beginning. Theodore's smile died halfway. His index finger stopped above the trackpad. The empire had not lost money yet. It had lost certainty. Corporate Secretary Martin Keene refreshed the share ledger portal twice. The warning remained beneath Vantage Creek LLC, North Lantern Holdings, and Cedar Crown Partners, 3 entities Theodore had used to control Asha's shares. Their combined voting authority was suspended pending review. No one spoke for 6 seconds. Theodore asked whether the wildfire had damaged the system. Keene looked toward outside counsel before explaining that the notice came from the independent stock administrator, not the company network. Facts had entered before fear did. At 9:16, the bank's representative joined by speakerphone and placed the related $74 million construction facility under temporary review. The Hawthorne Ridge buyer would not close while nearly a third of the seller's voting ownership remained contested. Theodore adjusted one cuff and said his legal team would correct the clerical error before lunch. Confidence was the only asset he could still spend freely. He still pictured Asha as the woman he had left 11.8 miles from the fairgrounds, carrying a brown tax folder and waiting for county transportation. He mistook that memory for her present weakness. The door opened at 9:19. A woman from the stock administrator's office entered with a certified evidence packet containing a scan of the old payroll envelope and a verified copy of Certificate 0047. She placed it on the folding table and removed Certificate 0047, bearing Asha Redmond's name, Theodore's signature, and the figure 28.7%. Theodore looked toward the exit, then back at the paper. The past had arrived with documentation. The administrator asked why the certificate had never been canceled, why no purchase payment had been recorded, and why 10 years of tax schedules still identified Asha as the beneficial owner. Theodore touched the edge of the certificate but did not lift it. At 4:37 p.m., 5 days earlier, he had decided his wife no longer deserved a seat in his evacuation convoy. Now, a folding table in County Fairground was deciding whether he still deserved control of the company she had helped build. 5 days earlier, ash moved across the Halberd Ridge evacuation lot like gray snow. 4 company SUVs idled beside the sales pavilion, while employees checked 26 assigned seats against orange aluminum tags. The wildfire had crossed the western containment road, and Dry Creek County Fairgrounds waited 11.8 miles away. Theodore treated urgency as permission. Asha Redmond stood beside Vehicle 2 with one canvas bag, a brown tax folder beneath her arm, and her assigned tag clipped to the strap. Her dark wool coat carried a dusting of ash, but her posture remained straight. Around her, residents held medicine boxes, pet carriers, and whatever documents they had remembered to save. She had packed proof before comfort. Genevieve Larkspur arrived in cream trousers and an ivory evacuation jacket that had never seen smoke. An assistant rolled forward 6 suitcases, 2 garment racks, camera cases, lighting equipment, and cartons marked executive media. Genevieve's polished smile narrowed when she saw Asha's bag already inside the vehicle. Elegance became territorial when space grew scarce. "We need Vehicle 2 for the response team," Genevieve told the operations manager, though she held no position at Halberd Residential Communities. She lifted Asha's orange tag and read the printed line. Dr. Asha Redmond. Vehicle 2. Seat 6. Then she looked toward Theodore, waiting for him to make the insult official. Theodore stood near the lead SUV speaking to a local producer about filming his arrival at the shelter. When the operations manager reminded him that Asha had been cleared for Vehicle 2, he paused at his cuff. Asha hasn't held an operational role in years, he said loudly enough for employees and drivers to hear. She can take county transportation. The sentence erased 16 years in 9 words. Asha had negotiated the company's first construction loan, pledged inherited property for its earliest land purchase, and built the phased development model that kept it alive through a housing downturn. Theodore now called those contributions old spreadsheets whenever Genevieve was nearby. A man rewrites history most confidently when he believes the records are gone. While Theodore described his convoy as steady leadership under pressure, Genevieve opened the evacuation roster on the manager's tablet. She changed Asha's status from family priority to non-essential civilian and typed her own name in his seat 6. Asha watched the manager receive the confirming email at 4:41 p.m. One screen displayed vanity, another preserved intent. Genevieve uncapped a black paint marker, crossed out Asha's name on the tag, and wrote Genevieve Larkspur above it. One employee looked away. Theodore saw every movement. When Genevieve asked whether Asha's brown folder also required a seat, he replied, "Those are personal tax papers." Her company shares were consolidated years ago. Asha's thumb rested against the folder's smoke-darkened edge. Inside were K-1 schedules issued by the 3 nominee LLCs, dividend reports, and letters from the original accountant. Theodore believed he had hidden 28.7% of the company inside 3 family-controlled entities. He had forgotten that tax records rarely respect a convenient story. Genevieve ordered the garment racks secured and placed the media expenses on a corporate black card. Asha removed her bag without argument. Theodore turned back toward the cameras before the doors closed. He had decided his wife was not important enough to evacuate with his company. He had not yet understood that the shares he buried still knew her name. The convoy had moved less than 20 feet when Asha stepped toward Vehicle 2. Ash crossed the black paint. The rear door remained partly open, and Genevieve was still directing an assistant to protect the garment bags. Theodore turned just enough to acknowledge his wife. His confidence assumed she had come to ask for mercy. Asha reached through the open door and placed the orange aluminum tag on the leather seat beside him. The black line through her name was still wet, and Genevieve's name sat above it in hurried block letters. Theodore's hand stopped against his phone. "You changed the list," Asha said. "I'll correct the record." She closed the door gently. No one inside understood that she had left them a time-stamped piece of evidence. At 4:44 p.m., the 4 SUVs pulled away toward Dry Creek County Fairgrounds. Genevieve adjusted her ivory collar and asked whether the smoke would make the footage look dramatic. Theodore slid the tag beneath a folder instead of throwing it away, then told the driver to continue. Asha did not watch the convoy disappear. She tightened the strap of her bag, tucked the tax folder beneath her coat, and walked nearly 1 mile toward the county pickup point. Families moved in the same direction, carrying prescriptions, blankets, and pet carriers. Dignity did not shorten the road, but kept her from walking backward. The county bus arrived at 5:02 p.m., 17 minutes late. A retired teacher held a small dog, a grocery clerk called his elderly father, and 2 children shared 1 pair of headphones. Asha gave her seat to a woman with a cane and stood near the rear door. No camera recorded the choice. While Theodore rehearsed a statement about protecting residents, and Genevieve charged $8,640 in lodging and media expenses, Asha opened the smoke-darkened folder on her knees. The K-1 schedules were arranged by year, each carrying the same ownership notation Theodore had said no longer mattered. Her eyes settled on 28.7%. The records had remembered what her husband expected her to forget. At 5:21, she found the old payroll envelope between 2 tax packets. The paper had softened with age, but Certificate 0047 remained legible, carrying her full name, Theodore's signature, and the date the company employed only 12 people. She traced the folded edge with one thumb. The certificate was no longer a keepsake. By 5:36, the bus reached the livestock entrance of the fairgrounds. Theodore stood beneath portable lights, telling a reporter that every essential member of his organization had arrived safely. Genevieve directed an assistant to reserve upgraded lodging and charge it to the company account. Across the grounds, Asha entered the old 4H judging room, where folding tables served insurance claims, lost document requests, and legal aid. She called Mara Quinn, the attorney who had filed the company's first formation papers 16 years earlier. "I need you to verify whether my original shares were ever lawfully canceled," Asha said. Mara asked whether she still had the certificate. Asha looked at the payroll envelope. "I have more than that." Mara Quinn reached table 14 at 6:18 p.m., carrying a legal pad and a portable scanner. The fairgrounds loudspeaker announced another evacuation zone. Volunteers stacked bottled water nearby, and families settled on cots beneath faded livestock banners. Asha waited with the brown tax folder open and the payroll envelope on top. Proof looked ordinary until someone tried to erase it. Mara unfolded Certificate 0047 beneath the fluorescent lights. It identified Asha Redmond as owner of 28.7% of the founding equity and carried Theodore's signature beside the corporate seal. There was no cancellation stamp, transfer notation, or replacement certificate. "This was never properly retired," Mara said. The first crack had opened in Theodore's version of history. 4:43 minutes. They compared the certificate with 10 years of K-1 forms, dividend statements, and 3 documents Theodore had placed inside family tax packets. The papers used broad language about administrative consolidation, but none stated that Asha was selling her shares. There was no purchase price, independent counsel acknowledgement, or verified payment. Mara wrote "spousal equity waiver defect" across the top of her legal pad. A waiver did not become valid because a billionaire preferred it. While Asha and Mara examined signatures, Theodore stood 300 yards away in the media pavilion approving a statement about corporate resilience. Genevieve reviewed evacuation photographs and asked an assistant to remove any image showing county buses. His chief financial officer called to ask why Asha's tax records still showed beneficial ownership. At table 14, Mara found the answer. The 3 LLCs appeared as nominal holders, yet every tax schedule traced the economic benefit back to Asha. They were also bound by a common voting agreement structured as a voting trust, placing their combined votes under Theodore's control. Dividend distributions had flowed into a family account he managed, but the accounting descriptions continued to identify Asha as the underlying owner. Paper had been quieter than deception and more patient. At 7:11, Mara connected to the independent stock administrator and searched the original issuance ledger. Certificate 0047 remained active. No lawful buyback, redemption, or cancellation appeared in the record. "Can they freeze the votes?" Asha asked. Mara explained that the administrator could suspend use of contested voting rights during review if the board, outside counsel, auditor, and Hawthorne Ridge lender received notice. It would not return the shares immediately. It would stop Theodore from using them against her. Asha nodded once. She was not asking the system to punish him. She was asking it to stop pretending. Mara drafted a notice of disputed beneficial ownership invoking the spousal equity waiver defect, demanding preservation of shareholder records, and requesting a voting trust rescission review. Asha read every line before signing. At 7:46 p.m., Mara submitted the notice. Across the fairgrounds, Theodore's phone lit with the first legal alert. Asha closed the brown folder. For the first time in 16 years, her silence had acquired a filing number. The borrowed office above Morrow's Hardware tilted slightly toward Main Street when Asha arrived at 8:23 the next morning. Mara had spread formation records across a scarred oak desk, and the payroll envelope rested beneath a brass paperweight. Outside, ash clung to parked trucks while volunteers carried blankets toward the fairgrounds 2 blocks away. Power often returns through doors no one bothered to lock. 16 years earlier, before Halberd Residential Communities had a polished headquarters, Asha had formed Redmond Community Holdings, LLC. The entity supplied $420,000 in startup capital, including proceeds from the small house her mother left her. It funded the investment recorded behind Certificate 0047, although the certificate itself had been issued directly to Asha. Theodore later persuaded her to let the entity lapse, calling it unnecessary paperwork between husband and wife. It had become inactive, but it had never been dissolved. At 8:41 a.m., Asha paid the reinstatement fee, updated the mailing address, and named Mara as registered agent. She opened an escrow account for disputed dividends and authorized the entity to pursue beneficial ownership reinstatement on her behalf. Each step fit on a sheet of paper. Together, they gave her claim a legal home Theodore could not dismiss as marital anger. While Asha restored the company carrying her family name, Theodore occupied a temporary suite on the second floor of the Fairgrounds Administration Building. Genevieve stood beside the window in a cashmere wrap, complaining that breakfast catering required manual approval. Theodore lowered his coffee when outside counsel explained that Asha's filing had reached the stock administrator, auditor, and Hawthorne Ridge lender. He said the matter would be resolved privately. Across town, Asha declined to keep it private. Mara filed the reinstatement certificate at 9:06 and designated Redmond Community Holdings as the entity authorized to pursue Asha's disputed share claim. She scanned Certificate 0047 beside the original capitalization schedule, showing the source of Asha's money. The brown tax folder was no longer neglected household paperwork. It had become a 10-year map of ownership. At 10:14, Theodore called Asha directly. He offered $18 million, a confidential divorce settlement, and lifetime use of one company residence if she withdrew the notice before noon. Asha listened without interrupting. "You are offering me a fraction of what you already took," she said. Theodore warned that a public dispute could damage the company they had built together, using together only when he needed her cooperation. Asha ended the call after 27 seconds. Mara answered the formal proposal with one sentence. She is not selling a complaint. She is restoring ownership. By 11:32, Redmond Community Holdings appeared on the administrator's file as claimant for Certificate 0047. Theodore's lawyers sought an emergency dismissal because the entity had been inactive. Mara attached the reinstatement order, funding records, and K-1 schedules. The request failed before lunch. Theodore had spent years turning Asha's name into a footnote. Now that name stood between him and every vote he had borrowed from her shares. The independent stock administrator completed its preliminary review of Certificate 0047 at 1:08 p.m. and changed the status of 28.7% of Halberd Residential Communities to disputed beneficial ownership. The update appeared in Share Ledger, then moved into the board approval system and the bank's loan monitoring file. Under the company's pre-existing disputed equity policy, the flag suspended use of the contested votes without deciding who ultimately owned them. Theodore was standing in room 2B when the green authorization bars beside Vantage Creek LLC, Northlander Holdings, and Cedar Crown Partners turned red. A structure built on borrowed authority had reached its load limit. He refreshed the page. The same notice remained beneath all three entities. Voting authority suspended pending review. Restore it, Theodore told General Counsel. The lawyer explained that no company employee could override an independent ownership dispute. At Morrow's Hardware, Asha and Mara saw the same update on a smaller screen. Asha did not celebrate. Mara confirmed that the hold prevented Theodore from voting the disputed shares, approving a major land sale, or using them to satisfy control requirements attached to the $74 million Hawthorne Ridge construction facility. The system had not awarded Asha anything. It had stopped Theodore from spending what he could not prove was his. At 1:16, he attempted to authorize the $186 million Hawthorne Ridge sale. The board portal rejected his signature and requested a second authorized director. Across town, Asha signed a preservation request covering every email, dividend report, tax schedule, and transfer instruction connected to her shares. While Theodore searched for a shortcut, Asha made sure the paper trail could not disappear. Genevieve met the first personal consequence at 129 inside a hospitality suite near the grandstand. She presented the corporate black card for a $16,380 charge covering upgraded lodging, wardrobe storage, private transportation, and replacement camera equipment. The terminal declined it. At the chief financial officer's instruction, discretionary executive spending had been placed under dual approval during the review. Theodore demanded that the restriction be removed. The CFO explained that transactions above $25,000 required board authorization, while smaller non-essential charges tied to Genevieve had been frozen after the legal notice. Personal accounts remained untouched. The company had only stopped financing private preferences. At 1:44, outside counsel requested 4 documents from Theodore: a stock purchase agreement, proof of payment to Asha, a properly notarized waiver, and confirmation that she had independent legal advice. His lawyers searched the digital archive and the records of all 3 holding companies. They found broad forms, copied signatures, and incomplete transfer schedules. They found no lawful sale. Mara placed a printout of the red notice beside the payroll envelope. Certificate 0047 had once looked like a relic from a smaller life. Now it had removed Theodore's ability to approve the largest deal of his career. At 2:03, ShareLedger issued the final dashboard message: voting authority suspended pending review. The problem was not hidden in his computer. It was written in papers he had assumed Asha would never keep. By 8:07 the following morning, the red notice had traveled beyond Halberd residential communities. Hawthorne Ridge's lender suspended the next $74 million construction draw. The title insurer delayed coverage on the 1,400-acre tract, and the buyer extended the $186 million closing deadline by 10 business days. 3 suppliers required a second corporate signature on new purchase orders. Consequence rarely arrives alone. In room 2B, Theodore sat with general counsel, the chief financial officer, and 2 independent directors while unanswered calls multiplied. He lowered a term sheet when the bank's regional president refused to treat the dispute as a private marital matter. Then he folded it along the wrong crease as the director explained that unclear beneficial ownership could affect every covenant tied to corporate control. At Morrow's Hardware, Mara uploaded 10 years of K-1 schedules from Asha's smoke-darkened folder to the auditor's review file. The pages carried ordinary numbers and the same ownership notation year after year. Asha remained identified as beneficial owner after Theodore claimed her equity had been consolidated. The folder had stopped being a household archive. It was now a witness with dates. The auditor matched Asha's copies to previously filed tax records. Dividend payments tied to her shares had flowed into a joint account Theodore controlled, but no sale proceeds had reached her. No cancel certificate, valid waiver, or payment supported the transfer. By 9:32, the facts behind Mara's spousal equity waiver defect argument had become a formal audit concern. Genevieve spent the morning calling communications vendors. 2 agencies refused new work without personal guarantees, and a transportation company declined another vehicle without a valid card. Luxury became heavy when no company paid to move it. At 10:11, the board received Genevieve's evacuation email and the operations manager's statement. The message showed that she had removed Asha from the priority list, claimed an unauthorized title, and used company resources for cameras and clothing. 2 employees confirmed she had crossed out Asha's name while Theodore watched. The driver of Vehicle 2 had found the orange tag beneath Theodore's folder, preserved it, and delivered it with a signed statement. The board chair placed the scratched metal beside a printout of Certificate 0047. One object showed the shares Theodore tried to erase. The other showed the woman he chose to leave behind. At 11:03, 3 independent directors requested an emergency vote to remove Theodore from the Finance Committee pending voting trust rescission. 2 institutional investors joined them, and the Hawthorne Ridge contractor required dual authorization. On the fifth morning, Theodore returned to the 4H room expecting a 10-minute closing vote. Instead, the stock administrator placed the certified evidence packet before him and asked why Asha's original certificate had never been canceled. The sale remained blocked, the lender remained cautious, and his borrowed votes remained red. Across town, Asha signed the final beneficial ownership reinstatement petition. She did not ask how frightened Theodore looked. The records were already answering for him. 6 months later, at 3:18 p.m., Theodore climbed the narrow stairs above Morrow's Hardware without an assistant, driver, or authority to summon either one. The $186 million Hawthorne Ridge sale had closed under board supervision. The $74 million construction facility had been restored, and Halberd Residential Communities had survived without returning him to the chief executive office. Asha's claim to the full 28.7% beneficial interest had been upheld. After the ruling, she executed a recorded assignment contributing the restored stake to Redmond Community Holdings, with final registration scheduled for the following Tuesday. The 6-month audit also identified $23.6 million in distributions attributable to her shares. The company had recovered faster than Theodore's importance. He entered the second-floor conference room, carrying a leather portfolio. Asha sat across from Mara beside a plain window overlooking Main Street, dressed in a charcoal suit with the smoke-darkened tax folder at her elbow. She chaired the Governance and Community Committee. Theodore remained a minority shareholder barred from executive decisions. His practiced ease disappeared when he saw that no seat had been reserved beside her. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet," he said. Asha had agreed only to hear a formal request. Theodore presented a resolution proposing his return as a non-executive director. He pushed the page forward, then withdrew his hand when Asha did not reach for it. He blamed the Wildfire for confusion, said Genevieve had exceeded her role, and claimed he never intended Asha to be stranded. Regret sounded carefully edited when responsibility remained missing. While Theodore tried to revise that afternoon, Redmond Community Holdings filed a governance policy banning private media teams from evacuation vehicles. The rule required 2 written approvals for any roster change and prohibited unappointed relatives or partners from directing employees. At the fairgrounds, crews installed the policy beside the livestock entrance where county buses had delivered displaced families. Asha had converted humiliation into procedure. Theodore lowered his voice and said Genevieve was no longer part of his life. Her consulting agreement had ended. Her wardrobe invoices had been returned, and the company had rejected $61,400 in evacuation charges. He spoke as though discarding her repaired what he had done. Mara slid a clear archival sleeve across the table. Inside rested the orange tag, still marked by the black line, through Asha's name. She held the marker, Theodore said. "You ordered the door closed," Asha replied. The sentence left him nowhere to hide. He asked whether 16 years together meant nothing. Asha opened the payroll envelope and removed Certificate 0047, preserved now as the document that had restored her ownership. She said those years meant enough for her to remember who had built the company, who had funded it, and who had tried to erase the record. At 3:31, she declined his request for a board seat. She did not insult him or mention Genevieve again. Theodore gathered the unsigned resolution. He had once believed leaving Asha behind would make her dependent on him. 6 months later, he was the one asking for a ride back into power. The following Tuesday brought the final ownership meeting back to the old 4H judging room at 10:04 a.m. The livestock banners were gone. Sunlight crossed the polished concrete floor, and the folding tables formed a square instead of shelter line. At the center rested the smoke-darkened tax folder, Certificate 0047 inside, its faded payroll envelope, the orange evacuation tag, and the amended shareholder register. What Theodore had dismissed as clutter had become the permanent record. The independent stock administrator read the final registration notice without ceremony. Redmond Community Holdings was entered as lawful holder of Asha's full 28.7% founding stake. The voting rights assigned through Vantage Creek LLC, Northlander Holdings and Cedar Crown Partners were rescinded, and the $23.6 million identified by the audit would move into escrow pending final accounting. The board approved a governance structure requiring Asha's committee authorization for every land purchase, executive appointment, and transaction above $20 million. Theodore remained a shareholder, but power no longer followed his name. He sat 3 seats from Asha with no title beneath it. He lowered the agenda when the chair announced that his removal as chief executive was permanent. The Hawthorne Ridge buyer thanked Asha for stabilizing the company, and 2 senior directors directed their questions to her. The reversal was complete before anyone named it. 12 miles away, Genevieve received a final notice from accounting. Her $61,400 in evacuation expenses had been classified as personal. Her vendor access had ended, and the company would not reimburse the suitcases, cameras, private transportation, or wardrobe storage she had called essential. Asha never needed to confront her. The records had done it. The board chair slid the amended register across the table. Beside Asha's name appeared the original issuance date, the restored 28.7% interest, and the notation beneficial ownership reinstated. She signed once and returned the pen. No applause followed. Consequence did not require an audience. Theodore asked whether she intended to take complete control of Halberd residential communities. Asha said she intended to protect what she had built, correct the company's history, and prevent executives from using emergency resources as personal privilege. She declined an offer to buy additional shares at a preferred price. She wanted nothing beyond what belonged to her, and nothing less. The orange tag received its final purpose that afternoon. Asha placed it in the company's ethics archive beside the revised evacuation policy, where every future director would see the black line through her name and Genevieve's unauthorized replacement. The tag remained proof that Theodore had abandoned his wife, but it now carried a second meaning. His contempt had become a governance failure with permanent consequences. Theodore watched the archivist seal the sleeve. 6 months earlier, he had left Asha behind because he believed she had no place in the company's future. Now, every major decision required approval from the woman whose shares had financed its beginning. After the meeting, he asked whether the divorce settlement could include a private understanding about his future role. Asha closed the payroll envelope, placed it in her briefcase, and walked past him. When he asked whether the shares had truly mattered that much, she turned once. They were always mine. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.